us every day are going on journeys. They might be short journeys, according to the weather, a walk on the Paulstock Trail or around Beckley. They might be in the car, a trip to Albertsons or Walmart, with apologies to those of you who are these days biking or walking to either of those places. They might be as short as traveling across the house or down the stairs to do our laundry. Some other journeys are a little bit more involved, a trip to Belgium to visit one's daughter, a challenging trip to the Mayo Clinic for tertiary health care, a cross-country unexpected journey for a funeral. Christianity and the Christian faith sees our entire life in the Spirit in terms of the metaphor of a journey. We are all on a journey. Christ came to show us the path of life in faith. Christ came and embodied that very path in his death and his resurrection. As journeys go, that I think it's about a 5 or 6 mile walk to Emmaus was a significant one for the two friends of Jesus on that journey. They were most likely a husband and a wife, and they were walking that road marked by trauma and loss, seeking almost without hope to make sense of their journey over the last week. So as they walk and wonder and hurt, a stranger comes and joins them and asks if he might share for a bit in their journey. And as they are talking one to the other, they offer bits and pieces of this jigsaw puzzle they can't quite put back together that make up their story of pain from the last days. A story they can't quite wrap their heads around. And of course, they cannot see that this stranger is their Jesus. Then the stranger turns rabbi and opens the scriptures to them. But if you can put yourself in their place for a minute and imagine when on your journey you're overwhelmed with trauma or the pain of an incredible grief and it's all so fresh and you don't know which way is up, you are not very able to be open and receive, much less understand new information. And they cannot see that this stranger turned rabbi is their Jesus. And so they come to the end of their day's walk, and the stranger makes as if to continue onward, and somehow, I don't imagine how this could even happen, they do have the presence of mind to recall the rules of hospitality, basic manners, and they invite him to come and join them for dinner. And then they're inside, in their home. They're in a safer place. And they can take a breath and relax. And they watch the stranger as he takes the bread and blesses it, breaks it, and shares it with them, evoking a simple Eucharistic pattern which would have been very familiar to Luke's readers. Their eyes are opened, and their journey into the resurrection is fulfilled. And they reflect after he leaves on those past days, and suddenly the pieces come together in a completely unexpected way, and they see their past through entirely new eyes. In Godly Play, our children's curriculum, we follow what is called a spiral curriculum, much like what we adults experience in our worship using the lectionary. We hear the same stories over and over and over again. We hear those journey stories of the people of God. And as we hear these stories each time, we find ourselves encountering these people on their journey in a different place in our journey. And so it's not a wheel spinning, doing the same thing over and over again, but rather a spiral that takes us ever more deeply into that mysterious life that is found in the risen Christ. But generally, another part of the reason we need to hear these stories time and again is that, like the couple on the road to Emmaus, we are often walking blind. We like to think we see and understand, and that we have all this faith journey stuff wrapped up in a little bow. Everything we needed to learn about faith we got in kindergarten, right? We don't need to open our minds again. And when we're in that place, God just laughs. Because our lines of sight are so limited. Sometimes, like that couple on the road to Emmaus, we're limited by that brain fog of grief, of a simple or complex trauma that keeps us from being able to receive. Sometimes we're limited by just a sense of complacency that we already know everything that we need to know. Sometimes we're blocked from seeing and understanding what God has for us by an almost religious sense of certainty, where our identity is so fully wrapped up in a previous way of knowing that we are unable to risk any openness to God's revelations for us in our world and our life today. What the journey to Emmaus reminds me of today is to be aware, or to beware, of how limited our blinders are. And this is tricky, because blinders, by definition, are things we are blind to. We are blind to the very fact that they even exist. And because we cannot see, and therefore do not know how much resurrection life there is in store for us beyond them, I would like to suggest today that we try engaging this week in a few simple spiritual practices. The first practice is a prayer practice, and I'd like you to engage with me in it now. Take a breath, and gently, as you breathe in, move your head to the side. I don't want anyone to pull a muscle. Just breathe in, then breathe out to the center, and breathe in to the other side, expanding your line of vision, and pray a simple word in your heart: open. God, open our hearts and our minds and our lives to your resurrection. One of the things that our brain does that this prayer practice can combat is that we have an overactive part of our brain called the amygdala, which is our sort of panic or fear response part of our brain that keeps us safe in fight and flight. But it's really active, perhaps overactive in the 21st century when there are no, well, usually there are no bears to be running from, but perhaps occasionally there are, but not on a daily basis. And our overactive amygdalas can get in the way of the subtle voice of the risen one. Like the traumatized friends of Jesus, we are often too broken to see him walking alongside us, sharing love, insight, and new life, and our visions have a tendency to tunnel more narrowly the more we are afraid. God, open us. Help us to trust and to see, to receive what we could not previously imagine. The second practice I'd like to invite you to engage in this week is a practice based on humility. It's another spiritual practice. You could call it a prayer too, but it's a humble prayer. So repeat after me to yourself. The possibility exists that I may not be right. put it all together. The possibility exists that I may not be right. Ooh, that's a hard one for some of us. But one of the clearest signs that we are bumping up against an unknown blinder that is keeping us from resurrecting life is the certainty that we already know the answer. The certainty is sometimes something that's going on in our heads, it's a thought. Sometimes it's going on in our hearts and bodies, and it's a deep feeling. When it's felt, this kind of certainty is often cloaked in the feeling of righteous indignation. You know what that feels like. It feels so good. Or a self-righteous sensibility. When we feel and think that we are certain and that we are right, we need to take a cleansing breath and say to ourselves, the possibility exists that I may not be right. Now, you actually might be right? But it's about holding it all lightly. And I would enjoin us, not just when we're looking for the risen Christ in our lives, but when we're engaged in those hot under-the-collar conversations with people with whom we disagree, to just take a breath and say to ourselves, the more certain we feel, the more we need to say it. We might not have the full answer. We might be surprised if we engage this practice how easily the blinders actually fall and Christ's presence is revealed in some of the most unexpected places in our lives. A third practice that we might engage is reflecting on an experience to open a path to the future. Now, so often when we're reflecting on our previous experience, we use it as an excuse to shut out or pin down possibilities for God. You might have heard this phrase. We often hear it in the church. We tried that once. You might even have said that or thought it yourself. I know I have. We don't even need to say the second part of the phrase, and it didn't work, and therefore we will never try it again. Reflecting on experience to gain wisdom takes the past not as a firm replica for everything that will happen in the future, but rather as a seed for resurrection growth and fruit bearing. For the friends of Jesus and Luke's community, the most important experience for reflecting on in order to gain a deeper wisdom and insight to Jesus as he exists in our future was the Eucharist, the breaking of the bread. Christ is broken for us, and when we receive that broken bread, it breaks us open to experience the resurrection in new and surprising ways. As we sit here today, we are all in different places on this journey we call faith. And in fact, you can't even really call it a single journey, since I know that God calls us each in such unique and special and loving ways. But I do know that we all meet one another time and again on these journeys. God in Christ is calling us to move forward beyond the boundaries of what we can currently conceive. So I would invite you this week to practice a prayer of openness, a prayer of humility, and a prayer of reflecting on experience for wisdom that you might have ears to hear and eyes to see, and a heart to embody the great things that God is up to in and for and through you.